So it is my pleasure to introduce Mike Dolahan, Putnam's Director of DCIO Content and Sales Enablement, and Bill Cass, Putnam's Director of Wealth Management Programs.
Leah, thank you so much for this opportunity to be with RPAG today. And golly, I'm feeling a little bit spoiled. I guess it was less than 30 days ago. I was with the RPAG group at the national meeting, and here I am now on a national webinar. So lucky for me to have a double dose here and a big opportunity. Bill, I think that you might agree as our wealth management program director for quite a while now that there's always interesting reasons to engage clients, particularly as you drift into the fourth quarter and start to think about tax planning. But I do like the title of this slide talking about engaging clients on recent retirement legislation. I don't know if it's more on the 401k defined contribution side, or Bill, it's more on the wealth management side. It just feels like there's lots of reasons to engage clients right now. What do you think?
There is. Mike, I love it when Congress actually passes a bill and it's signed into law on the retirement side of the time. It gives us something to talk about. I look at this as an excuse to get out in front of clients and prospects. Either, for you, obviously you're more focused on the plan sponsor side. I'm more focused on the individual, the retail advisor side. And for people that aren't aware of what I do, basically my role at Putnam is running our wealth management team, which means that we focus entirely on financial planning. That's all we do. So think taxes, think retirement, think estate planning, wealth transfer, think even college savings. So we're responsible for creating all the content. Again, mostly on the individual side. We do tailor some content to smaller business owners, but on any of those topics. So I spent a lot of time here in Boston, as you can see, downtown Boston right here. And then I spent about half my time out on the road, traveling, speaking at conferences, meeting with financial advisors. So looking forward to our conversation today.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And if we look at the next slide, a couple of things come to mind. I mean, first of all, Bill, it just seems like your wealth and financial planning world is creeping over into the retirement plan 401k world and vice versa more and more and more. And I think, though for everybody here on the webinar, this looks like quite the laundry list of provisions. I do think we need to focus here for some time because first off, we've had back-to-back bills with Secure and Secure 2.0 coming in 2019 and 2022 respectively. And as you look at the list of provisions here between the two bills, I think something interesting to soak in, and I think, Bill, you'll have great perspective from the broker-dealer side, maybe even the RIA side, is that there is a lot on this page for us as an industry to digest. And as a matter of fact, it's kind of interesting, Bill, you say you love when Congress passes bills because it gives us something to talk about. But, I do think sometimes some of the people in Congress think when they pass a bill, poof, it just automatically shows up in all of our computer systems and everything works like a charm with all these new rules. But as we've recently heard, and we'll allude to in a minute on a different topic, lo and behold, it's a tough time for our friends at the record keeper back offices and at the broker-dealer RIA back offices as they try to catch up with some of these provisions. So, Bill, we'll describe these a little bit one at a time in a moment, but what would you say about just the undertaking to try to figure all this out?
The way I look at Secure 1.0 and Secure 2.0, Mike, is there's a lot to unpack here. In Secure 2.0, there's roughly 90 different provisions. And obviously, we're going to hit on the highlights, but there's a lot. Are they as transformative and at a big picture as the Pension Protection Act back in 2006? Probably not. But a lot of these elements or provisions are building on what we sort of started with the PPA back in 2006. For those of us that have been around that long and before that, right? I think largely, again, and I'll play the retail advisor view, right? The individual retirement saver view, right? I look at a lot of the provisions we're looking at here, like RMD age to 72. Heck, if you want to give me more time, I'll take it. Doesn't necessarily mean you should, but I'll take it. Things like additional catch-up contributions age 60 to 63 that we're going to see in 2025 through Secure 2.0. Hey, this is all very, very good news. I would say most of this, at least from the individual on my side of the fence, Mike, is largely positive. The one negative had to do with Secure 1.0, and that's the repeal of stretch distributions. I'm spending a ton of time still talking about that, helping advisors on number one, understand the rules, and number two, how to engage with their clients on how to best sort of mitigate that issue. So that that's a big takeaway, and there's a reason it's in there, because when you start adding tax credits and other types of incentives, they cost money. You have to create revenue on the other side. Now, I shouldn't say have to, because a lot of times Congress does stuff without creating revenue, right? And that's why we have these deficit issues. But they using that repeal of stretch distributions to offset the cost of other issues. So again, largely positive from my view, but there's a couple in there that may negatively impact individual savers, and certainly the record keeping challenges that you mentioned in terms of Congress thinking, hey, you guys just go into your system and flip a switch. It doesn't quite work like that, right, Mike?
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide, but we'll stay here for a moment. Just a few comments from the defined contribution side. I think folks are finding that the open MEP and PEP, to your comment, Bill, is definitely good news, with the common plan or commonality rule, if you will, taken away. But again, the details can get pretty murky pretty quick. You third one down, you see some new activity around encouraging auto enrollment or mandating auto enrollment. I think we all know on this call that that's worked incredibly well, and it's nice to see it codified here rather than just sort of a tradition. It now literally is codified, so we're pretty excited about seeing that. And then if you jump over to the Secure 2.0 side, we saw that, lo and behold, the tax credits are so popular early on with Secure that with 2.0, we went ahead and have increased the tax credits already. So that's pretty exciting as well. And then as you just see a couple more details that are thinking about, and the things that are developing, probably on the bottom is a really interesting one at an interesting time, which we'll talk more about too, which is the student loan payment being allowed to qualify as an employer match. Now, I will mention there two things. Number one, you may know that was previously available just to one company via private letter ruling. And I don't care if you're an expert financial planner like Bill, or if you're more from the legal side of things, nobody likes to try to use somebody else's private letter ruling. So once again, it's nice to see a pretty cool policy codified here to allow others to use it. That's very exciting. But again, that one's a slippery one. I've had the chance to be in front of some plan sponsors recently, and some HR experts. Didn't really matter if they were at a several thousand or 10,000 plus person company or less than that. Folks are still a little murky about, well, how do you actually figure out that a student loan payment occurred and therefore could trigger a matching contribution? So it is that situation where there's just so many different things here that the details can get fuzzy, the details can get confusing. And that's why for everybody on today's call, we're just proud at Putnam to partner with RPAG and to serve as practice management teammates with you and kind of be your first call, so to speak. When you get a little bit sideways on some of these rules, if you'll give us a call, we're happy to help you. And by all means, if we don't know the answer, we'll track it down and get back with you. So let's go ahead and dig a little deeper, Bill, on the next slide on the retirement plan side. And we'll see maybe if you have some comments on a few of these. So first off, I just mentioned auto enrollment for new plans. So hear me loud and hear me clear. Auto enrollment is required for any plan established after the first business day of this year, and it has to be turned on by the first business day of 2025 at the latest. So that kind of raises two questions. Well, gee, if you got to turn it on within a couple of years anyway, why not turn it on right away? To me, that makes the most sense, is just go ahead and turn it on. But what we think is a very interesting engagement opportunity for all of you on this webinar is to think through, wait a minute, Mike, if new plans have to have auto enrollment, what about the plans that I've got that never adopted auto enrollment? Are they sort of out of date, or Are they behind the times? Are they less competitive? I think the answer would be maybe. And so, from an engagement standpoint, I think this first change requiring you to use auto enrollment for all new plans gives you a really good reason to engage with existing plans and check in with them to see how happy they are with their current auto enrollment situation, and maybe even calculate for them what it would cost for them to turn on an auto enrollment, at least in a way that's at least as similar to what's happening with new plans today. So I think that's worth noting.
And Mike,
Jump in, Bill.
There's there's a few exceptions for that at the sort of micro plan level, 10 or less participants, and then I think it's business that hasn't been operating for at least 3 years. So they are going to give you some flexibility on the very, very small side in certain cases.
No, and that's a great point, Bill, because I think that also crosses over to maybe this next point, which is that even on the state mandates, we're up to, I think it's 22 or 23 states that now have a mandate that folks have to offer a workplace savings plan. Bill, you nailed it. In the majority of the states, if you have less than 10 employees, that mandate doesn't apply. So similarly, some of these auto enrollment rules don't apply. So keep coming up with those type of examples, Bill. That's super helpful. So one of the things we have seen, speaking of the convergence of the state mandates with the availability of what's in the provisions of Secure 2.0, is a real robust development in the establishment of private sector 401k plans. So if you think that you're around one of the big states like California, New York, Illinois that have mandates to offer, you kind of are in a situation where you can do nothing and pay a penalty, which is usually not very popular. You can establish a state plan, which sometimes is not popular either, just because of certain feelings about a state. Or thanks to Secure, you can often establish a private sector 401k, and again, subject to certain limitations, for the first 3 years or so, have the administrative cost of that private sector 401k absorbed by these tax credits that cover per employee certain limits of the administrative fees for a startup private sector 401k. And Bill, you might have some perspective. Can you explain to people why taxpayers get excited about credits versus deductions sometimes? How does that work?
Well, first of all, my message again to the typical retail advisor audience that I deal with is, small business owners, ask them if they have a plan. The government is throwing so much money at this. And we talk about they're basically saying, hey, we're going to cover the cost for 3 years administratively, but there's also tax credits to offset employer contributions, at least for participants that are less than $100,000 in wages. Mike, there's that auto enrollment tax credit. So again, tax credit versus tax deduction. Tax credit is dollars in my pocket. So a $5,000 tax credit is worth $5,000 to me. A tax deduction, well, that's good. That's also good. It's going to reduce my taxable income, but it's not, at the end of the day, it's not going to be worth $5,000 in my pocket. Now, be sure with these tax credits, you can't double dip, right? You can't take a tax credit for starter plans and then deduct those costs, those ongoing costs. Basically, the business owner is going to have to work with their tax professional to determine what makes more sense. In more cases than not, it's going to be taking a tax credit.
Awesome, Bill. Thank you for that. And so regarding 403B plans being allowed to join MEPs and PEPs, that was one of those legislative glitches that kind of existed when the MEP and PEP rules were around. And so now, if you think it makes sense, perhaps for a 403B plan to jump into some sort of a group of plan arrangement, that's now available in a much more streamlined way than it previously was. And, if you're out there and you're serious about the 403B world, you're probably thinking, well, that's cool, Mike, but what about CITs? And unfortunately, we're still not at a point, thanks to Secure and Secure 2.0, there's nothing in there that finalizes the availability of CITs. So stay tuned on that one. We're hopeful. I don't know what the odds are. Maybe 50-50 it gets done this year, but there's nothing current in front of Congress that's going to get it done. So just sort of make a note that if your 403B wants to join a group, it can. moving on to employer matching contributions for student loan payments. Leah, have you got a question for us, or looks like you're
Yes,
coming on screen? Yes, ma'am.
Couple questions. The first one, will the auto enroll change apply to simple plans transitioning to a 401k?
So my impression is yes. So once it becomes a full-fledged 401k, it is for all new 401ks established after the first business day of this year, even if they were in a prior retirement plan arrangement, such as a simple. And the big reason, Leah, would be because you're jumping from the world of a non-ERISA plan with simple IRA to an ERISA plan with 401k, which is why these new rules apply.
Hey, Mike, on that, sort of related to that, a question that I've received on my travels when I talk about these startup tax credits has to do with, okay, let's say I have a client, business owner, they've been running a simple IRA for years and they sort of want to graduate, upgrade to a 401k. They want the loans, they want the vesting and all the bells and whistles. Can I take advantage of that startup tax credit if I move? Unfortunately, the answer to that is no. I wish it was the case. But the answer is that is no. They basically there's a 3-year look back period and say, okay, here are the folks that you're covering, that you're planning to cover. Have you covered substantially these in the last 3 years? And that would sort of be the definition of, is it a startup plan or not for purposes of that startup tax credit? Now, you could still benefit from the auto enrollment credit as well, things like that. But the specific to the startup, then that wouldn't apply.
Great perspective. Thank you, Bill. Leah, was there another question that you mentioned?
Yes, but I think we can do it at the end of this slide. Sounds like we're getting there.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I think we were talking about the employer match for student loan payments. So realize there, everybody, that you may know by now that Abbott Laboratories famously got a private letter ruling because, like many others, they were noticing that the burden, if you will, of student loan payments was often interrupting younger employees' ability to contribute or even start contributing to their retirement plan. And so Abbott Laboratories essentially wrote the IRS and said, hey, what about this? What if an employee is faithfully paying back their student loan? Could we count that as the same thing for employer matching purposes as a contribution, and therefore at least get them some employer money into their plan so they weren't starting from, so far back once they were finally able to contribute? Now, the reason this one, Bill, I think is super duper timely is because we're just in the midst of post-COVID individual people who owe student loans are starting to have to repay again after a long delay. That is starting to kick in again. So any comments there about what you've seen when you're out on the road talking to folks?
This one hasn't come up as much because it's a little bit more specific to on the plan sponsor side. I don't think the average retail advisor probably isn't aware of this. I bring it up. Conceptually, I think it's great because as someone who started at Putnam, this is my 33rd year at Putnam, and it was difficult even back then with student loan payments and trying to participate in the plan. It took a while. And as we know, if you lose out on those first years, the being able to participate in the market and the time value of money, it really puts you behind the 8 ball a little bit. But I love it conceptually. And we've spoken to folks on Capitol Hill prior to this that had a very big focus on student loan debt. So I know where this came from. I know why it came up. Now, on your side, Mike, there's one thing for it to be great sounding conceptually. It's another aspect of it to record keep it and maintain it. I'd have to think, and maybe I'm wrong, Mike, I think about, at least at the big plan level, things like this, once it's figured out from a record keeping perspective, I think the bigger plans are going to have this. Because it's going to be like back in the day with self-directed brokerage, right? I don't know how many people use it. My experience, not many, but you have to check the box, right? So I think it probably at some point down the road, this is going to be a check the box thing for at least plan sponsors of a certain size plans.
Yeah, and Bill, I think you make a good point. The other thing I would think about is not only the certain size sponsors, but probably sponsors from certain fields. So maybe you think about architecture, maybe you think about engineering, possibly you even think about accounting. Think of places, medical where folks do often graduate with above average even student debt. So that could be another reason why an employer might go through the hassle of working, even if they're smaller, working with their record keeper to get it turned on. Is just for competitive reasons of the field that they're in. And, I do a lot of business, Bill, in the Washington, D.C. area. And there you have defense contractors all over the place for obvious reasons, right? And they're often also competing for highly qualified employees that might often have student debt due to the nature of their degrees. And so they too might need to want to try to go through the hassle of turning on these student loan payment matching contributions for competitive reasons. So the last three are pretty quick and easy. Financial incentives for plan.
I have a couple of questions on this. Does the student loan this provision apply to simple plans? My understanding is no, but maybe you can clarify that. And then do most of these 2.0 updates not include simple plans? I wouldn't say that's the case. The tax credits apply to simple IRAs. So I'd have to go back and really look and say what applies, what doesn't. But I would say a good number of them apply across the board, not just on the ERISA side, but on the non-ERISA side, whether it's a SEP IRA or a simple IRA.
Yeah, I do think that is correct, and definitely worth investigating. The bill mentioned, you mentioned, Bill, at the beginning of the call that there's as much as 90 provisions in Secure 2.0. As you believe it or not, if you Google or use your favorite search engine and look for Senate Secure 2.0, the Finance Committee of the Senate, of all places, put out a pretty handy summary of those different provisions, and it's organized by section. So, and it's, believe it or not, kind of halfway readable and understandable. So that might be a good source just to double check where in writing you could back up some of those different simple provisions as needed. And we can come back to you on that one as needed as well. So, Bill, we okay to move forward?
Yep.
Okay, thanks for those questions. In terms of financial incentives for plan participation, so literally you're now at a spot where an employer could choose, if they wanted to give a Starbucks gift card to get someone to come to an employee education meeting. Previously, that was prohibited. And you might say, well, gee whiz, I give out a $5 Starbucks gift card to get somebody to show up. Well, if it helps them be a better investor, that's probably a great investment on behalf of the employer. So again, a de minimis amount is permitted there. There's special provisions. A lot of people like to call this the on-ramp. So, what does that mean? You're getting on your local freeway, your local interstate. You got to get on the on-ramp first. You got to get up to speed. But that's what people call these starter 401k and 403b plans. It's a way to have not quite the paperwork hassles that you would have with a full-fledged 401k or 403b, but nonetheless, a little bit more to it than maybe a simple IRA. So it's sort of an in-betweener that is now available. And then the last part is the provision to be able to buy a qualified longevity annuity contract. That's what QLAC stands for. Qualified longevity annuity contract. That was increased outside of qualified plans. So there's a way to port money to move it from inside your qualified plan to outside for purposes of buying a QLAC. And basically the amount available to do that was doubled. Bill, I think it was doubled from from 50,000 to 100,000. Am I remembering that one right?
Oh, you're stumping me there, Mike.
I think that's what it was.
I think this just goes back to the transition that has happened, started decades ago, right? Going from a defined benefit world to a defined contribution world. And I would say from a planning perspective, when and if I retire, the only source of guaranteed income that I will have is Social Security, unless I go out and purchase. So I think it makes sense to sort of open up the door to more guaranteed income products and allow folks to kind of leverage those as tools, because longevity risk is probably the biggest risk that retirees face. So we just can't. We sort of have an idea when we're going to retire. We don't know how long exactly we're going to be on this earth. Is it going to be 10 years? Is it going to be 30 years? Is it going to be 40 years? So anything that has to do with sort of hedging longevity risk, I think is very, very useful.
Well, Bill, good point. And at the Retirement Plan Advisory Group National Conference in California, Stacy, my colleague who was with me, I certainly would suggest, and Steve McKay, who was with us as well, would suggest that, wow, it felt like every other breakout session had some sort of flavor related to retirement income. So once again, Bill, from a record keeping standpoint, trying to work out logistics of, how can you offer retirement income in plan versus outside of plan? This continues to be a big debate. So Leah, I think you said that we had a question here maybe before we jump to the next slide.
Yes. I got two questions for you. So the first one, given so many provisions are insecure, which one or two seem to be most popular or impactful?
Overall, it sounds like rather than just from Secure 1 and Secure 2 combined, is that the way you'd read the question, Leah?
Is there, I guess specifically within Secure, is there one or two that seem to be more popular, I guess?
Sure.
On the individual side, I'll cover that I'll definitely cover that on the next slide. From a plan sponsor perspective, I'll defer to you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. So I would say the tax credits have definitely proven to be very popular. As a matter of fact, you may be aware from this call that there is some fintech being developed that will actually analyze for you, particularly if it's a small business that is starting a plan for the first time, what these fintech products are now able to do. I think you guys have something very powerful in-house at RPAG that will do some of the work for you as well, is they will analyze for you based on the business's profitability. Once you go through and see how many employees they have, some bare bones details about the employees, from maybe a whole laundry list of possible plan designs, which one gives the business owner the best net tax benefit? And then based on the employee information you entered, since that triggers the tax credits, it'll also calculate for you on top of that, what are the secure tax credits? So I would say those tax credits have been super popular on the retirement plan side.
Great, thank you. And then one more question. Given Secure 2.0 has only been effective for 9 months, what are the biggest impacts that you have seen on the industry already?
Yeah, so I think we've got a big one coming up, whereby the industry, as we tried to show on that first slide after the title slide, is really facing an uphill endeavor to program everything that's required to be programmed. And so you may have heard there was some doubt up until weeks ago about what was going to be allowed next year for catch-up contributions, because could the catch-up contributions be regular? Did they have to be Roth for certain people? And I think Bill's going to talk about that a little bit, so I won't say much more about that. But that's been, I think, one of the biggest things is you all may recall it was right before Christmas, I think like December 22nd or 23rd, Bill, before this thing was signed. I think it was actually signed by the president after that to become law. So here you go. You have something signed 2 days before it becomes effective. And that's just a tough way for the industry to deal with new legislation. So I'd say that's what we've seen, Leah, the most in the last 9 months, is just everybody scratching their head, attending events like this, trying to digest exactly what happened. And I think, Bill, from the wealth standpoint, the next slide will allow you to make some good points about that.
Yeah, just so we're clear what Mike was talking about, starting next year, if you were going to make a catch-up contribution and you had earnings at your employer of more than $145,000, that's wage earnings, then you would be forced to make your catch-up contribution into a designated Roth account within the plan. You wouldn't have that choice anymore. Again, this was in Secure 2.0. This is a revenue raiser, creates revenue for the federal government. And the good news, Mike, as you mentioned, notice 2023-62 said, hey, we're going to push it back to 2026 because no one can figure out how to do this in this amount of time. So I think actually the Treasury Department was being pretty reasonable there. So we're going to wrap up our conversation. I'll cover sort of the individual side, what I'm seeing during my travels. The obvious one is the increase in the RMD age. So if you were born between 1951 and 1959, your RMD age now is 73. And if you're born like me, 1960 or later, it's 75. I think we need to, on the individual side, we need to make sure folks understand this, right, and know this. But I also think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because I think there's people that wait until they reach that required beginning date, and then they take out the minimum. Whereas they might be more advantageous from a tax perspective to start taking a little bit of money out of the 401k or the IRA if they're in a more advantageous tax bracket, depending on their particular situation. Obviously, assuming a no 10% penalty applies. So I think this notion of, hey, I'm just not even going to do anything till I reach age 73 or 75, I think that's a mistake. And that really dovetails into my next bullet, which is connecting.
Well,
Yes.
before we get to that, could you explain, does that first issue with the RMD age, does that provide a pretty good planning opportunity? Because folks might have, whether it's IRAs or former 401ks or all the above, kind of scattered all over the place, and so it's kind of hard not only to determine, to your point, when to turn it on, but exactly how to turn it on. And do you see that sometimes in your travels?
A little bit. I think it becomes very difficult when you have money spread around, because then you're trying to figure out what your RMD looks like, and you have multiple providers. And remember, you can aggregate it for IRAs. So if I have 3 IRAs, I don't have to take RMD out of all 3. I could just take one, assuming it's the right amount. That doesn't apply with ERISA plans. So I think this conversation will naturally lead folks to say, hey, I need to sort of do some house cleaning. I need to consolidate. So I think that's a big aggregation opportunity for the advisor. So that talking about RMDs, I think this is a great conversation to have. And I think it dovetails also with the next bullet point, which is the 10-year rule. This is dominating a lot of my time as I travel. And so go back to the 10-year rule. This is on inherited accounts. I won't go into chapter and verse today, but the gist of it is that for most, when someone passes away with a 401k or an IRA retirement account, it goes to the kids or someone else other than the spouse. They have to take it out within 10 years. There's some limited exceptions to that, but they have to take it out within 10 years. Whereas before, if I, as a 40-year-old, if I inherited an IRA, I could stretch distributions for decades. I might have 40 plus years to take it out. If I stretch based on my remaining life expectancy. So now you have people that they're going to have to take it out within 10 years. If it's not a Roth, they're going to have to pay taxes on those distributions in a shorter time frame. So do most IRA savers or retirement savers care about this? No. The vast majority do not care about this 10-year rule. But think about who does care about it. It's the people with the $3 million IRA, the $5 million IRA. Because I've been getting calls I got a call a couple of weeks ago, a widowed client, 65, no kids, one beneficiary, her niece, $3.7 million IRA. How do we, they've worked hard to create this nest egg, and they just don't want to waste it in taxes to the federal government. And so we have a piece called distribution planning under the Secure Act. It goes over the rules around, how the 10-year rule works, but then it also provides some planning considerations. So for example, if you have to take it out within 10 years when it goes to the next generation, does it make sense to split up the IRA equally amongst my 3 kids? Okay, so I have 3 kids, a third, for example. Maybe not. So talk to your clients about beneficiary reviews. Does it make, for example, one of the beneficiaries might always be in the highest tax bracket. It might make more sense to leave life insurance that's more tax advantage to them, or appreciated property like real estate or stocks that benefit from stepped up cost basis of debt. So I think I like that beneficiary conversation because it starts to connect you with the next generation. Mom and dad aren't going to live forever. And if you want to compete to maintain that relationship with other family members, you're going to have to do this type of pre-work. You're going to have to meet them. And you don't have to meet everybody. You just look at your clients that are sort of your A-list clients. And I go back, Mike. So that's why advisors, at least on the individual side, should pay attention to this. Because the people that care about the 10-year rule are either A, their best clients today, or B, their best prospects tomorrow. So I think that's really important. We can help you navigate the ins and outs of that. And believe me, there are a lot of ins and outs to this. I also think the Roth accounts, if we went back
one clarification, because if I go back, good grief, 30 years ago to when I was an advisor, wow, way back. Stretch IRAs were popular back then and have been popular ever since then. So all of a sudden, poof, they're gone. And you said something, I think at the beginning, about it being part of the pay for this legislation. Can you just help us understand why this helps pay for the legislation and why it was important to take away something so popular?
Well, you're accelerating distributions once IRA dollars pass the next generation. You're accelerating that tax bill. And again, the government just, when the government is creating tax legislation, not to bore everybody, they just care about a 10-year window. What's going to happen over there? Are they going to get money? Is it going to generate revenue over the 10 years? If it after that, they don't, from a budget scoring perspective, they don't care. So that's why I think that's why they basically use this 10-year rule. Now you think about the typical individual when they pass away. How old are they? They're mid 80s, maybe, right? That's life expectancy, could be 90s. Think about if they're leaving it to the kids. How old are the kids? 50s, early 60s, peak earning years. So with the IRA, it's just not a good way to pass wealth to the next generation as compared to before with using a stretch strategy. So,
which is where the Roth comes in next, right?
Exactly. So I talk about with IRAs, big IRAs, maybe spend more of it down, donate more of it, convert more of it. And obviously, every situation is going to be very, very unique. And to segue to that, the Roth accounts expansion of being able to, for example, say to your employer, "Hey, I want my matching contribution in a designated Roth account in my plan instead of going into a typical pre-tax account." The more tools we have in the toolbox to hedge the risk of higher taxes in the future, the better. So I think Roth accounts, we spend a lot of time talking about this. And just as an example, here's what it looks like if you compare the tax rates today versus projected tax rates at different income levels. When the tax code expires at the end of 2025. So remember, Congress doesn't do anything. We just roll back to what was in place prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And this is sort of, I overlaid the current brackets on with the sort of higher tax brackets that apply once it expires. And this is what it looks like. So for example, someone making between 274 and 364, and these are married couples, that in that slice of income, there's a 9% increase from a 24% margin rate to a 33% margin rate. So I don't know if that's going to happen. We don't have a silver ball, but I can tell you with deficits are going to be close to $2 trillion this year and having to deal with Social Security and Medicare long term. I don't think taxes are going to be better 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Okay. And when I talk to clients about that, Mike, whether it's advisor clients, I'm talking to the public, right? We do events for our advisors, their clients. And I can't get anyone really to raise their hand and say, "Hey, I think taxes are going to be better 5, 10, 15 years down the road." Just doesn't happen. So the more we can use Roth, and I'm not just saying bet it all on Roth. I'm saying have some diversification from a tax perspective. We can help you have that conversation with individual clients. And then
Bill, a quick question on that good point about now being able to raise your hand and ask that your company matching contributions get put into a Roth account instead of previously being pre-tax type account, at least the way it was taken out. Does that mean that I'm going to be taxed on that employer contribution, or is the employer going to be taxed on the contribution? How does that part work for me, the participant?
And I'm sorry, I missed your last piece there, Mike.
So the question, is that if I do take my employer matching contribution in a Roth, does that mean it's going to be taxable to me that year?
Yeah. So you're gonna see it in your paycheck, right? Because so that's the trade-off. So when I'm speaking to younger colleagues at Putnam, and I'm encouraging them, consider the Roth option within the plan, and even if you have to do it gradually, Mike, maybe you adjust it gradually over time. Maybe kick it up 1 or 2% more in the Roth. Maybe you can sort of start living with that impact on your paycheck. Okay.
Yeah,
and
then
the last thing that I'm getting a lot of questions on Secure 2.0, there's a provision that says, okay, if you have money left over in a 529, we're going to create another option for you, right? So the option would be if I have leftover 529 money, I could change the beneficiary and just, sort of go that route. I could take it out and pay taxes and a 10% penalty on the earnings. And this is a third option, up to 35,000 in my lifetime. I can move that from the 529 into a Roth IRA in the name of the 529 beneficiary. So let's say, I own 529 for my oldest daughter, Katie Cass. She's gone through college. There's some left over. I could transfer that, or we could transfer that into a Roth IRA in her name. So you can't do the $35,000 all at once. It basically acts as a contribution. So you have to move over, for example, let's assume under 50 years old, $6,500 a year. And you have to have earned income. The one thing that doesn't apply is the rule that says, okay, hey, how much money are you making? Are you making too much money to contribute directly to a Roth IRA? That doesn't apply here. So I think what the federal government is saying, hey, we want to encourage people to save it at 529, and we want to take away a little bit of the objection, say, okay, what if I don't need it? What if my circumstances change? This gives you another opportunity to do that. Frankly, the question I get, Mike, is, okay, I get that. What about myself as the parent? Can I put it into my Roth IRA? I've already done enough for the kids. How about something for me, right? The answer to the question is yes. You can change the beneficiary of the 529 to you as the owner. You can be an owner and a beneficiary, and then presumably you could transfer this. And again, this doesn't start till next year. The one question we have is the 529 has to be established for at least 15 years. I don't think changing the beneficiary would sort of reset that 15-year clock, but I'm not 100% sure. And I'm not sure we're going to get clarification on that. But I think this is a really interesting provision. The feedback I've heard is some clients love it. I talked to an advisor the other day at a conference. Client had $28,000 left in the 529. And now they have an option. Other clients say, hey, I'd like it a lot more if I could just take the 35,000, for example, and just do it all at once versus having to do it in increments. So it's really going to depend on the client. As an advisor, I'd want to let my folks know before they hear about it from somebody else. So I think that's the gist of it.
Great point. So I think we go to the next slide, Bill.
I'll skip on that one.
Okay, great. So you all have been a great audience. We can see the attendee number not only was high, but man, it was sticky, which is unusual for these events. So thank you for sticking with us. Just to mention two websites for you to consider, actually three. Obviously, Putnam.com has good resources, but also website for wealth information, which is one of my favorite go-tos, is PutnamWealthManagement.com. Bill, that's the right site, right? PutnamWealthManagement.com.
PutnamWealthManagement.com. That's a site we've been running for 13 years now. There's no login. There's no password. All you're going to find there is all the financial content that my team is responsible for putting out there that you can use with your clients. Weekly blog articles and written pieces as well.
Such a great site. Love that site. And then also, if you go, as it says here on the right side of the screen, to Putnam.com/DCIO, be on the lookout there for our perspectives section. That's where we have some blog articles about the 7 top things that we like about the secure provisions to discuss with your plan sponsors. And then also we wrote a second article on the 5 nuances inside secure. And that kind of goes back to Leah's question earlier. So thank you so much for attending today. Leah, I'm going to hand things back to you, and we appreciate all your help setting things up today.